I would like to introduce Patricia Walters. Patricia was born in Columbus, Ohio. She graduated cum laude from Philander Smith College, Little Rock, Arkansas. A National Methodist Scholar, President of Alpha Kappa Mu National Honor Society, Who's Who in American colleges and universities, and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She worked for over 35 years in Ohio, Franklin County, DC government, and Montgomery County government as a social worker. 30 of those years were with Montgomery County, and she's currently retired. She was recently widowed and married for 47 years to Dr. Ronald Walters, and who happily supported and encouraged him as he tirelessly worked every day of his life to improve the lives of our people. I saw that as my primary calling. And if you don't know who Dr. Walters was, Google him. He's an extraordinary gentleman and made great contributions to our society. My second passion is African American art, and I spent especially the last 12 years searching all over the country for art to add to the Walters collection. I'm an avid reader, especially books on art and art history, and I'm not a joiner of groups, etc., but I do belong to a local book club, and what makes this club unique is our books are solely on African American art.
Thank you, Myrtis. Let me just start the presentation. I want to give a shout out for a group that I do belong to, and that's Millennium, because Juanita and Mel are dear friends of mine, and they're doing wonderful things in the art world. So I do belong to that organization, and I apologize for it not being on my bio. I'm going to start with the question that was posed by Myrtis, and that is, how did I get started in collecting? And I want to share with you because when I was on Joe Madison's show to talk about art with Alva Binder, who praised my work. She did the appraisal part, and I talked about the masters in the Walters collection. He asked me how I got started in art, so I'm going to share this story with all of you. Most of my friends know that my husband used to come home because he taught at Howard for 25 years, as you well know, before he left and went to the University of Maryland. And he always came home talking about a lady named Anita Moore Hackett. And he talked about her relentlessly. And I'm saying, oh, this was before I met her. And it was apparent to me that he admired her greatly. So one day he came home, he said, you're going to meet my buddy. He said, we're going to her house for a dinner party. And I said, gosh, I can't wait to meet this lady. So I walked into her home, and I was just, fell in love. Her home was just the warmest, most beautiful home. It spoke to my spirit, my heart, because she had just a profusion of color throughout her whole home of African American artists. And I didn't know anything. This was in the 80s. And I had no clue as to what it was that I was even looking at. I just knew that it spoke to my heart and my spirit. And so I have Anita to thank for where I am today. My husband said later on in his life, after I got the bug, he didn't know whether to still love her or to hate her. So at any rate, I want to thank my dear friend Anita for exposing me and being my first mentor in this acquisition. The very first artist that I absolutely fell in love with, even with an untrained eye, was Romero. And it was hard for me when I put this presentation together, because he is my favorite artist, to figure out which one I wanted to present, because I had 10 of his pieces. And I just love his work. So that's how I got started in the business. I had no clue as to who the masters were. I had no clue as to what my genre was. I had no clue of anything. I just knew I had this great passion, and I loved what it was that I was looking at. But as I have grown older, because most of my art has been amassed over the last 12 years. I wasn't smart enough to buy a lot of pieces in the 80s, because if I had, I wouldn't be spending the kind of of money I'm spending now for art. But that's another story for another day. And so I finally figured out that I loved what was known as the masters, the figurative work in particular. It was something about, because many of these great artists were untrained. Some were trained. But Duncanson was a house painter, for example. So he was not trained. Beginner still, he's really, in my mind, considered as an outstanding landscapist, and really is outstanding in the field of what they call the Hudson River, which is white genre, Thomas Cole and others of that ilk. And Diane and I were just very fortunate that we were asked to present our Duncansons to the exhibit that was at the Thomas Cole House. And this is the piece that we're looking at now that was exhibited at Thomas Cole. This is the oldest piece in my collection. It's been authenticated by Joe Kettner, who is one of the foremost scholars in Duncanson's work. So I feel very comfortable about the pedigree of this piece. And it's between 149 to 152 years of age, because he estimates that it was done between 1860 and 1865. Of course, this is untitled by Robert, and we discovered through his scholarship that his name isn't Scott, but it's Selden. So I learned that when I went up to New York to attend the showing. And Diane, it may be modest and won't say this, but I'll say it anyway. Her piece is fantastic because it's the oldest piece that was in the show. Her piece is even older than mine. It goes back, I think, to 1845. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right? Okay. And maybe she has a on exhibit. I don't know for sure. But at any rate, I got a telephone call the other day from Joe Kettner, and he advised me that Columbia University is doing a retrospective of Duncanson's work and has asked for this piece, so it's going out on loan again at Columbia University. But I became very educated, and now I'm letting Columbia University know that I'm leasing this piece to them. I did it for free the first time around. The second time around, I got educated by a person that's very knowledgeable in this field, and she told me to do some research to ascertain what it would cost to lease this for 4 months and get a tax write-off. So that's where I'm headed with that. All right, I'm going to move now. Oh, let me also say this about Duncanson. I was very fortunate, my husband and I, to go to Sweden. And one of his most iconic pieces, Duncanson's iconic pieces, is called Land of the Lotus Eaters. And that's in the Swedish court. And I was standing there just mesmerized by it. It's a huge canvas, mesmerized by it, surrounded by Europeans. And I said, oh God, honey, I said, did you ever think that we would be in the court of the king of Sweden? And I'm looking at an African-American freedman that did art back in the 1800s. And so all of a sudden, it got real quiet around me, and people said, he's not African-American. And so I said, well, that just shows your ignorance. I said, he not only is an African-American, but he was a freed man, he was not a slave. So I would suggest you go back and do your history. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to speed this process up. But you can tell, also she asked us to share what our favorite piece is in our entire collection. So obviously, you kind of know that this is my favorite piece. This is another, I'm very fortunate in my collection to own 7 pieces by what we call 19th century artists, which their work was done in the 1800s. So I own Bannister, Duncanson, Charles Ethan Porter, Grafton Tyler Brown, and I have two Duncansons, 2 Bannisters, and Charles Ethan, and still pursuing. This piece here, I was fortunate to acquire this from Swan's Gallery a couple of years ago. And it's the second oldest piece in my collection. It's 138 years old, 1874, I believe. This is just a marvelous piece here by William Osiah Tanner. This is his son, Jesse. At the time that I purchased this, I had no clue. I got it down in Atlanta at an NBAF fair. And thank God the gallery owner didn't quite know what this piece was. But because I'm an avid reader of art history, I was reading the Driscoll book on hidden heritage. And I kept saying, that kid looks familiar. And I got the book, went to my drawing, and this is an original study of Jesus and Mary studying the scriptures, which is in the show up in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And so if you look very closely, you're going to see his mother, because you know Tanner always used his son and his wife to sit for him. So this is his son Jesse, and this is his wife, Mary. And so I said, gosh, I said, I got to do some more homework to make sure that I'm seeing what I'm seeing is what I'm seeing. And so it was confirmed by David Driscoll, a friend of mine, that this was definitely the original study. And by the way, folks, there's nothing wrong with original studies. Original studies are what the artists use to prepare for their final work. So someplace floating around is an image of his wife alone, by herself. So this piece means a lot to me. I was a little devastated that it wasn't selected by the museum in Philly for their retrospective, because the two images that this flowed from were on display, but by the time they found out that I was the owner of this piece, they had already set their show. This piece I just absolutely loved. I got it from Swans also. The history of this piece is just absolutely amazing, because this was when Biggers was a student at Hampton University, and he did very few pieces in what we call the social realism. This piece was done in 1945. So he was off in the military, but he was also a student at Hampton. And you know that Charles White, because his work in the early period here simulated social realism, which emphasized the huge feet, arms, so forth and so on. And so this is a wonderful, rich history. So I'm going to give this piece to Hampton. I've already notified them, because it's a rich history. On the back of it, it has Charles White's name. It has Victor Lowenfeld's name, as well as Biggers' name. So this is an original pencil on board. And I was very lucky to acquire it, and I'm going to pass it on to, it can't be in a better place than Hampton because of the history. I had already shared that with Diane, because she sits on the board. This is an absolutely lovely piece by Lois Maylou Jones. It was done in 1947 when she went to France. She went to France on many occasions, but she did this piece called Audain Page d'Arcalis. And if you're familiar with Bill Cosby's work on the other side of color, this is watercolor. But he has another piece that she did, Audain Page d'Arcalis, that's very similar to this. His is oil on canvas, and of course, mine is a watercolor. And of course, Lois Maylou Jones also flowed from Howard University. She taught there, and in fact, she was one of Elizabeth Catlett's professors. This is, I think, one of the favorites in my entire collection, because I absolutely love Elizabeth Catlett. And she was a pure genius, and not only was she just a fabulous printmaker, but she was also just the best sculptress I have just ever laid my eyes on. And you can't see it in this image, but her attention to detail is phenomenal. It's just awesome. And this piece is, the model for this piece was a lady named Glory McLaren, who was a dancer in the Katherine Dunham Dance Theater. And she also did a print called Glory. And I'm a proud owner of the print also. in picking out what I would show you all, I tried to go to the 4 areas in which I amass art. I amass art, original pieces, rare prints, limited editions, and photographs and sculptures. So this is a work by James Van Der Zee called Society Labor. And as you well know, Van Der Zee always did his signature inside of the negative. And he was to New York City during the Harlem Renaissance what Scurlock family was to Washington, D.C. And anybody that got married in D.C., my girlfriend said, you weren't considered married unless you had a picture by the Scurlock family. So James Van Der Zee is just a splendid photographer, and I think I have about 4 of his pieces in the collection. I have the famous raccoon coats, but this is my favorite piece. This is a Cat's Cradle by Charles White. It's a very, very rare etching, probably the largest etching in terms of my research that he's done. He did this in 1972. And I had always bragged that I had never seen this in any of the books that I've read until a friend of mine, Joyce, who's a bookie, came across a book called The Primus Collection. And she said, your image is in that book, Miss Patricia. And I said, you got to be kidding me, because I've never seen it. He only ever did 25 of these. So it's very, very limited. Sure enough, she gave me the book and he was in there. So I said, well, I'm in good company. And all of my work has been appraised, of course, but I was just stunned by what the appraisal came in on this piece. This is Kanan by Augusta Savage. This was done in 1929. I just love this piece. I think that he's just a cocky little kid, and she just got him and she nailed him. And I absolutely love it. I got this within the last year. So it's become one of my favorite pieces also. Well, I have Myrtis to thank for this. She called me and told me that she had an Alma Thomas. She knew that I was looking for an Alma Thomas. And so I hustled right on over here. My girlfriend, Anita, couldn't come with me that day. I got in the car because I hate to drive, but I came on over here and there I found. And it took me 30 seconds, and I said, I'm buying it. And I just absolutely love this. This was done in 1960. And she also is a product of Howard University. And she was definitely into abstract art. That's her genre, that's her specialty. Back when most of the artists in her time frame were doing figurative pieces of work. I couldn't decide which Douglas to bring to share with you guys, but I wanted to do this one because it's the lesser known of his prints. But I love the image. I have his work from the Genesis series also. And when I decided to put this in the presentation with Myrtis, this is called Frederick Douglass by Jacob Lawrence, who was an absolute genius also.
This will have to be the last one.
Okay. This is an original watercolor on ink that was done in 1945 by Romero. It's my second one. I'm just going to not say anything about any of these. That's a Richmond Barthay. This is in Samela Lewis's book, by the way. And it's really not a portrait mask, but it's called Mask of the Fawn. It's on page 74. And this is my lovely EJ, who I absolutely love. This is Doc Thrash. That's Sam Gilliam. Thank you.